I moved to Sunridge Estates on a Tuesday in late September, 3 years after selling my software consulting firm. The colonial-style house had caught my eye during my search for something quiet, something maintenance-free, somewhere I could finally focus on the historical fiction novel I had been putting off for a decade. The real estate agent mentioned an HOA in passing, handed me a thin booklet of guidelines, mostly standard stuff about lawn height and exterior paint colors. I signed the papers, hired movers, and by Friday I was arranging furniture in my new home office overlooking a meticulously maintained community park. The first time I met Karen Whitmore was on a Saturday morning exactly 1 week after I had moved in. I was unloading groceries from my car when a silver Lexus SUV pulled up to my driveway at an angle that blocked half of it. A woman in her mid-50s stepped out, blonde hair styled into what I can only describe as a news anchor helmet, wearing a white pantsuit despite the fact that it was barely 9:30 in the morning on a weekend. "Good morning, I'm Karen Whitmore, president of the Sunridge Estates Homeowners Association. I wanted to personally welcome you to the neighborhood and go over a few items that need immediate attention." I set down my grocery bags and extended my hand for a handshake, trying to project friendliness despite her tone suggesting this was more inspection than welcome. She looked at my hand for a beat too long before offering a limp two-finger shake, then immediately pulled out a tablet and began swiping through photos. "Your garbage bins are visible from the street." Section 7, Paragraph 3 of the HOA Guidelines clearly states that all waste receptacles must be stored in the garage or behind a privacy fence when not in collection day. I took these photos Thursday evening. That is a $50 fine for first offense. Before you think I should have paid more attention to the guidelines or maybe I should have seen this coming, let me remind you that this was less than 7 days after moving in. I had not even received my first piece of mail at this address yet, and my garage was still packed with boxes I had not unpacked. But sure, if you enjoyed this story so far, do me a huge favor and smash that like button. Subscribe to Karen Eat World for more stories about entitled people getting exactly what they deserve. Trust me, you will want to see where this one goes. I explained the situation calmly, mentioned I would have everything organized within the next few days, offered to move the bins immediately if it was that urgent. Karen's smile did not reach her eyes. "The fine has already been logged in the system. You'll receive official notice by mail. I do recommend you prioritize reviewing the entire guidelines document. We've had to remove 3 homeowners in the past 18 months for repeated violations. I'd hate for you to become number 4. She drove away before I could respond, leaving me standing in my driveway holding a gallon of milk and wondering what exactly I had gotten myself into. That $50 fine arrived 4 days later via certified mail, requiring signature, along with a comprehensive 27-page HOA guidelines document that apparently superseded the thin booklet I had been given at closing. This new version had been updated just 6 months prior, and according to the revision notes on the final page, Karen herself had authored most of the new additions. I paid the fine. I moved the bins into my garage, which required renting a storage unit for the boxes that had been occupying that space. I read through all 27 pages of guidelines, and was genuinely shocked at the specificity of some rules. Exterior holiday decorations could only be displayed between December 1st and January 7th. Garden gnomes were explicitly forbidden. Any vehicle parked in a driveway overnight must be moved by 7 in the morning or face a $75 fine per occurrence. Basketball hoops, even portable ones, were banned entirely. The list went on. For 3 weeks, I kept my head down and followed every rule to the letter. I measured my grass height every 3 days to ensure it stayed between 2.5 and 3.5 inches as mandated. I submitted a written request form to plant a row of lavender along my front walkway and waited the required 10 business days for approval. I kept my outdoor light fixtures on timers to comply with the lighting hours restrictions Karen had apparently implemented to reduce light pollution and maintain neighborhood character. Then came the incident with my car. I owned a 1967 Mustang Fastback, ivy green with a black vinyl roof, that I had restored over a period of 5 years as a passion project before selling my company. It was not a garage queen that never saw roads. I drove it regularly, but I also took care of it. On a Sunday in late October, I drove it to a classic car meetup about 40 miles away, got home around 6 in the evening, and parked it in my driveway planning to wash it the next morning before putting it away. Monday morning at 6:45, I was making coffee when my doorbell rang. I opened the door to find Karen on my porch, tablet in hand, photographing my Mustang from multiple angles. This vehicle is leaking fluids onto the driveway, which violates Section 12, Paragraph 8. Additionally, classic cars are considered recreational vehicles under the updated guidelines and must be stored inside garages or off property. I'm documenting evidence for the violation report. I walked out to my driveway in my bathrobe and slippers. There was no leak. Not a single drop of any fluid anywhere under the car. I pointed this out. Karen zoomed in on her tablet screen and showed me a photo where she had apparently sprayed water on my driveway, then photographed the wet spot. This was taken at 6:30 this morning. Clear evidence of fluid accumulation. The audacity was so absurd, I actually laughed, which was apparently the wrong response because Karen's face turned a shade of red that clashed dramatically with her pink blazer. You think HOA violations are funny? You think property values are a joke? This neighborhood was rated second best in the county before people like you started moving in with your attitude and your disregard for community standards. People like me. I had been here 5 weeks, I had followed every rule, paid a fine I did not deserve, and now I was being accused of crimes against property values because I parked my car in my own driveway overnight. I took a deep breath and tried the reasonable approach one more time. I explained there was no leak. I offered to show her maintenance records proving the car was mechanically sound. I pointed out that her photos showed water, not oil or coolant, and suggested perhaps the automatic sprinkler system had created the wet spot she photographed. Karen was already typing on her tablet, not listening. $300 fine for fluid leak and improper vehicle storage. This is your second violation, Mr. Patterson. One more, and we initiate removal proceedings. I suggest you take this seriously. She left. I stood in my driveway in my bathrobe, looking at my perfectly maintained Mustang, and something shifted in my thinking. I had tried being reasonable. I had tried following rules even when those rules were petty and excessive. I had tried being a good neighbor. None of it mattered because Karen did not want compliance. She wanted submission. She wanted everyone in this neighborhood to understand that she was in charge and your property rights ended where her authority began. I went inside, made a phone call to my attorney, and another to a former client who now worked as a county land surveyor. Then I paid the $300 fine, put my Mustang in storage off property, and started doing research. Over the next 2 weeks, I learned quite a bit about Karen Whitmore and the Sunridge Estates HOA. She had been president for 7 years, running unopposed in every election because she had systematically driven away anyone who might challenge her. The 3 homeowners she mentioned who had been removed had actually been foreclosed upon after Karen levied thousands of dollars in fines for violations ranging from legitimate to completely fabricated, then placed liens on their properties when they refused to pay. She had changed the HOA guidelines 17 times during her tenure, always expanding her authority, always adding new restrictions, always finding new ways to extract fines from residents. The HOA board consisted of 4 other members, all of whom were either afraid of Karen or benefited from staying in her good graces. Meeting minutes from the past 3 years showed that every single motion Karen proposed passed unanimously, often without discussion. Several homeowners had filed formal complaints with the county about HOA overreach, but those complaints went nowhere because technically Karen was operating within the authority granted by the neighborhood's founding documents, even if she was abusing that authority in creative ways. I also learned that Karen had her eye on my property specifically. My house sat on a corner lot with access to 2 streets, and according to county records, Karen had tried to buy it twice before I did, both times offering below market value. The previous owner had refused to sell to her out of spite after years of harassment. Now here I was, the new owner, and Karen was going to make sure I understood who really controlled this property. The third violation notice came on a Wednesday in mid-November. Apparently my house numbers were mounted 1/4 inch too far to the left of center on my garage door. How Karen determined this, I have no idea, but the notice included detailed measurements and photographs with digital rulers overlaid on the images. $200 fine. Threat of removal proceedings if I did not correct the issue within 72 hours and pay the fine within 30 days. I was done playing defense. It was time to buy some property. Here is something most people do not know about HOA rules. They are incredibly specific about what happens inside the neighborhood boundaries, but those boundaries are defined by legal survey documents filed with the county. Change the survey, or more specifically, acquire land that affects access to the survey area, and suddenly you have leverage that no amount of HOA guidelines can override. I called my surveyor friend and asked him to pull every piece of property documentation related to Sunridge Estates. What I learned was fascinating. The neighborhood had been developed 20 years ago on what used to be a large farm. The developer had sold all the residential lots, but kept a narrow 5-acre strip of land along the eastern border, probably planning to develop it later or sell it for commercial use. That strip sat between Sunridge Estates and the main county road, and while there was an easement granting neighborhood residents access to the county road, that easement had some very interesting conditional language buried in the original filing. The 5-acre strip had changed hands 3 times over the years, and was currently owned by an elderly woman named Dorothy Chin who lived 2 states away and paid a property management company to keep it maintained as vacant land. I called Dorothy, introduced myself, and made her an offer 30% above market value for vacant land in this area. She accepted within 24 hours. I closed on the property 3 weeks later, 2 days before Thanksgiving. Now I own the 5-acre strip between Sunridge Estates and the county road. More importantly, I own the land on both sides of the access road that connected the neighborhood to the outside world. And thanks to that conditional language in the original easement, the access rights granted to the HOA could be modified by the property owner under certain circumstances, specifically if the property owner needed to perform infrastructure improvements for safety or environmental reasons. I hired a civil engineering firm and had them draft plans for a private nature preserve on my 5-acre strip. The preserve would include walking trails, a small pond, native plant landscaping, and most importantly, a new access road configuration that met all county requirements but happened to require significant modifications to the existing easement. The county approved my plans in early January. Construction permits were issued. Everything was completely legal and by the book. The existing access road would need to be relocated about 40 feet south to accommodate the preserve's main trail and pond. The new road would still provide access to Sunridge Estates, but here was the interesting part. Since this was now a private road crossing my private property to access my private nature preserve, I had the right to establish usage rules for anyone crossing my land. And my usage rules were going to include a small access fee, proper vehicle registration requirements, and most critically, a code of conduct that prohibited anyone with outstanding property liens or unpaid legal judgments from using the road. Karen had placed liens on 4 properties in Sunridge Estates, including 3 foreclosures and 1 ongoing dispute. Those liens were public record. Those liens were legal judgments. And according to my new access road usage policy, anyone with such judgments against them could not use my private road crossing my private land. But I was not done yet. Remember those HOA guidelines Karen loves so much? Section 19 covered HOA officer conduct and specifically stated that any officer found to have filed fraudulent violation reports could be removed from office and held financially liable for damages. Karen's water spray trick on my driveway was fraudulent. I had her timed and dated photos. I had weather records showing no rain that morning. I had my car's maintenance record showing no leaks. And I had security camera footage I had not mentioned to anyone, showing Karen spraying my driveway with a water bottle at 6:28 in the morning, then photographing it. I filed a formal complaint with the HOA board, included all evidence, and invoked Section 19. I also filed a civil suit against Karen personally for fraud, harassment, and intentional infliction of emotional distress, seeking damages equal to every fine she had ever levied against me, plus legal fees, plus punitive damages. The suit was solid enough that my attorney was genuinely excited about it. But the real devastation was yet to come, and it centered on something Karen herself had created. 2 years ago, she had pushed through an HOA guideline amendment that allowed the board to levy personal fines against any officer who brought disrepute to the community through their actions. It was designed to keep board members in line and prevent anyone from challenging her authority. The amendment defined disrepute as any action that resulted in legal judgments against an officer in their capacity as HOA representative. My civil suit qualified, and that guideline had no upper limit on fines. Construction on the nature preserve began in February. The first thing my crew did was erect temporary fencing and signage indicating the existing access road would be closed in 30 days for relocation. Notice was sent to all Sunridge Estates residents as required by county law. Most residents did not think much of it. There was going to be a new road, slightly different location, life goes on. Karen showed up at the construction site on day 2, demanding to speak with whoever was in charge. The foreman directed her to me. I was standing near the surveyor stakes, wearing jeans and a work jacket, reviewing drainage plans with my engineer. You cannot close this road. This is the neighborhood access. You don't have authority. I showed her the county permits. I showed her the property deed. I explained that the existing easement was being modified per the conditional language in the original filing, all approved by county officials, all completely legal. The new road would be open in approximately 6 weeks. Residents would have continuous access throughout construction via a temporary gravel path, and once complete, everyone would need to register their vehicles and agree to the usage policy. What usage policy? You can't charge people to access their own homes. I was not charging anyone to access their homes. I was establishing reasonable rules for crossing my private property, which was my right as the landowner. The fee was minimal, basically covering my costs for road maintenance. And the restrictions on users with outstanding liens or legal judgments, well, that was just common sense security policy. Karen's face went through several color changes as she processed what I was saying. Then she made her crucial mistake. This is harassment. This is retaliation. I'll have my attorney shut this down, and I'll make sure you're removed from this neighborhood within the month. She stormed off. 3 days later, I received notice that the HOA board was holding an emergency meeting to discuss my construction project and its impact on the community. The meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday evening at the community clubhouse. All residents were invited to attend. I showed up early with my attorney. The room was packed, maybe 70 people, nearly every homeowner in the neighborhood. Karen sat at the front table with the 4 other board members, looking confident and prepared. She had a presentation ready, complete with printed handouts about how my construction project was going to devalue properties and destroy neighborhood access. She never got to give that presentation. My attorney stood up during the public comment period and formally presented the Section 19 complaint to the board, including all evidence of Karen's fraudulent violation report regarding my car. He also informed the board that a civil suit had been filed, and that per the HOA's own guidelines, Karen was now subject to personal fines for bringing disrepute to the community through actions resulting in legal judgment. The room went silent. One of the other board members, a man named Richard, who I had learned was actually terrified of Karen, but also desperately wanted out from under her control, asked to see the evidence. My attorney handed over copies of everything, including the security camera footage. They watched Karen spray my driveway with water, then photograph it. They watched her create false evidence to justify a $300 fine. It was all right there, time-stamped and clear as day. Richard moved to remove Karen from her position as HOA President, effective immediately, pending investigation of the complaint. Another board member seconded. Karen started objecting, loudly, insisting this was a setup, that the video was somehow faked, that I was the problem here, not her. The vote was 3 in favor of removal, 1 abstention. Only one board member voted against removal, and that was someone who I later learned was Karen's sister-in-law. Karen was no longer HOA president. But I was not done. With Karen removed from office, the Section 19 complaint moved forward to a formal hearing. The board reviewed evidence, consulted with the HOA's attorney, and ultimately found that Karen had indeed filed fraudulent violation reports, not just against me but against at least 6 other homeowners over the past 3 years. Some were minor exaggerations, some were complete fabrications, like the water spray incident. All violated the HOA's own rules about officer conduct. The board voted to fine Karen $12,000 for damages to affected homeowners and bringing disrepute to the community. They also voted to remove all liens she had placed on properties unless those liens were supported by clear, documented evidence of legitimate violations. 3 of the 4 liens were removed. The foreclosed homeowners suddenly had legal grounds to sue for wrongful foreclosure. But here is where it got truly devastating for Karen. My civil suit was moving forward, and her attorney was advising her to settle because the security camera footage was indefensible. But Karen could not settle easily because she did not have liquid assets. Most of her money was tied up in her house, which happened to be located in Sunridge Estates. And my new access road was about to open with its usage policy that prohibited anyone with outstanding legal judgments from using the road. The new road opened on a Saturday morning in late March. It was beautiful, properly paved, with nice landscaping and a small gatehouse where residents could register their vehicles. Registration was free for the first year as a courtesy. The process took about 5 minutes per household, and most residents did not mind, because the new road was actually nicer than the old one. Karen showed up at the gatehouse on Sunday morning, attempting to drive through to leave her property. The attendant, a polite college student I had hired part-time, asked her to complete the registration process. "I don't need to register anything. I live here. Let me through." The attendant explained that all users of the private road needed to register and agree to the usage policy. He handed her the clipboard with a single-page form. Karen grabbed it, started reading, and I watched from my car parked nearby as her face went pale. The usage policy was printed clearly at the bottom of the form. By signing, users agreed they had no outstanding legal judgments, property liens filed in their capacity as HOA officers, or pending civil suits for fraud related to HOA activities. Anyone who could not truthfully agree to these terms was prohibited from using the road per the landowner's liability and security requirements. Karen had all three. The $12,000 HOA fine was a legal judgment. The lien she had placed and were now being challenged created liability. And my civil suit was pending. She could not sign the form without lying, which would create additional legal problems. And she could not use the road without signing the form. This is illegal. You cannot block me from accessing public roads. But I was not blocking her from anything. She could access public roads anytime she wanted. She could drive across the nature preserve trails if she wanted to risk the trespassing charges. She could walk to the county road, about half a mile through the woods, and call a cab. She could even sell her house and move somewhere with normal road access. What she could not do was use my private road across my private property while refusing to comply with reasonable usage policies. Karen tried arguing. She threatened lawsuits. She called the police, who showed up, reviewed the property documents and permits, and explained to her that this was a civil property issue and she needed to contact an attorney. She called the county, who told her the road and usage policy were legal and properly permitted. She sat in her car at the gatehouse for 40 minutes, making phone calls, getting increasingly frantic. Other residents started lining up behind her, annoyed that she was blocking access. Eventually someone called her sister-in-law, who came and picked her up, and Karen's car was towed back to her driveway per the gatehouse policy about abandoned vehicles blocking access. Over the next week, Karen tried everything. Her attorney filed an emergency motion arguing the usage policy was discriminatory. The judge reviewed the case and denied the motion, noting that the restrictions were based on objective legal criteria and applied equally to anyone meeting those criteria. Karen tried to organize other residents to protest, but most people were actually happy she was no longer in charge and were not particularly sympathetic to her situation. She tried to sell her house quickly, but with a pending civil suit and no easy road access, buyers were not exactly lining up. The final piece fell into place 6 weeks later, when my civil suit went to mediation. Karen's attorney strongly recommended she settle because the security camera evidence was devastating and a jury would likely award significant damages. Karen agreed to a settlement that included a formal written apology, payment of all my legal fees, and a judgment for $60,000 in damages and emotional distress. That $60,000 judgment meant Karen now definitely could not sign the road usage form. It also meant I could place a lien on her property if she did not pay. And since her property was now difficult to sell due to the access situation, and since the lien would make it even harder to sell, Karen was effectively trapped in a house she could not easily leave without walking half a mile through woods, in a neighborhood where everyone knew she had been removed from power for fraud, owing money she could not easily pay. But the absolute final twist came from the nature preserve itself. Remember how I mentioned it included walking trails open to the public? I had designed those trails specifically to showcase native plants and wildlife, and I had made sure they were ADA compliant with proper gravel surfaces and benches every 100 yards. I put up nice educational signs about local ecology. I even installed a little parking area off the county road for people who wanted to visit. The preserve was beautiful. It became popular with local hikers and bird watchers. And it was located such that anyone walking the main trail would pass directly alongside Karen's backyard fence, where informational signs happened to mention that the preserve was created by converting former access roads, and that the project had been featured in local news as an example of private conservation efforts. Every single person who visited my preserve walked past Karen's house. Many of them had read the news articles about the HOA president removed for fraud. Some of them were Sunridge Estates residents, who were thrilled to have the nature preserve and grateful that Karen was no longer in charge. All of them could see Karen's house, trapped behind her fence, accessible only by walking or by somehow resolving her legal judgments enough to use the road. I was having coffee on my back patio one morning in May, about 8 months after Karen had first showed up in my driveway with her tablet and her attitude, when I saw her standing at her back fence staring at the trail. A family with 2 kids was walking past, pointing out birds to each other, clearly enjoying the preserve. Karen's face was a mixture of rage and defeat, and something that might have been the first glimmer of understanding that she had done this to herself. Every petty rule she had created, every fraudulent fine she had levied, every time she had abused her power to make someone else's life difficult, all of it had built toward this moment where her own choices had locked her into a situation she could not bully, or fine or rule her way out of. She had spent 7 years teaching everyone in this neighborhood that property rights mean nothing when you have authority, and now she was learning what happens when someone else has the property rights, and you have nothing but the consequences of your own actions. She looked up and saw me watching her from my patio. Our eyes met across the distance, and I raised my coffee mug in a small, polite gesture that said everything that needed to be said. She turned and walked back into her house without a word, and I knew that she finally understood exactly what I had done and exactly why there was nothing she could do about it. If you made it this far, thank you for watching. Stories like this take time to research and write, so if you enjoyed watching Karen get absolutely demolished by her own rules, smash that like button and subscribe to Karen Eat World. We have got tons more stories about entitled people facing epic consequences. Drop a comment and let me know what you think. Should I have done more? Was this enough? What would you have done in my situation? I will see you in the next video.